Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. This is episode 1000, my interview with Stephen Kotler. We're discussing the art of impossible. Enjoy. Hello, Stephen. Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here.
Good to be with you.
One of my favorite authors out there. You've written some incredible books, mate.
Thank you so much. It's nice of you to say.
You've got so much work there. And it'd be hard to pick a best one, I imagine. But do you have a particular favourite that you've written?
It depends on the day.
Depends on the day.
I would pick
on a good day.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'll pick Rise of Superman is the most consistent favorite.
Yeah. I mean, you're an expert. You're an expert in peak performance, right?
I am.
Is that how you like? If you had the elevator pitch for us, what would you say?
It's a fair place to start for sure. So why don't we start there? I'm an expert in peak performance.
Expert in peak performance. What got you into this field, Stephen? Is it a personal journey, or is it just that's where your research has led you?
But little of both.
Yeah.
I started out my career as a journalist.
Yes.
And I in the early 1990s. And journalism is this crazy, great, fun, amazing career where essentially you can get paid to be curious. And if you're curious about stuff, you can essentially find out ways to go out and, learn about it and earn a living. And in the early 1990s, I was super curious about two things, and they don't sound very related. But one, sort of the seeds of peak performance, I was just really obsessed with sort of understanding how humans work, and very specifically from a neurobiological perspective. I wasn't super interested in psychology, but in the 1990s, neuroscience sort of moved from like kind of basic parts of the brain to the kind of the very beginning of what we called then behavioral neuroscience, how people work basically. And I was obsessed with that. And simultaneously I was obsessed with action and adventure sports, surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding, and the like. And if you know anything about the 1990s and action sports, it's often referred to as the so-called era of impossible, where more impossible feats, that is stuff that had never been done and most people believed could not be done beyond human capability, in every single action sport, surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding, and the like. These impossible challenges kept falling over and over and over and over again. And I was living in these communities. These were my friends, and I had sort of an up close and personal look at this. And, first of all, it just demanded explanation. Nothing like that had ever happened in sports before. Where the heck was it coming from? What was going on? Why were these athletes suddenly able to kind of do the impossible? And more important, it was these athletes. And what I mean is, in the communities I was in, most of the people I knew, most of my friends, didn't have a ton of money. They didn't have a ton of education. They had a lot of them, very difficult childhoods, broken homes, just tough upbringing. And there was a lot of drugs, a lot of risk taking, a lot of alcohol. And normally you put all those things together in a community and people die young or go to jail. What they don't do is reinvent what's possible for the species. And that's what was going on. So those two things together just caught my attention. And I was like, I got to know how this is happening, why this is happening, what's going on. And I decided that neuroscience was the best tool for the job. So that was sort of where it all started for me. And that, by the way, hasn't changed. That was sort of where I started, and that's sort of where I am 30 years later.
Nice story. The adventure sport, the extreme sports, I guess. Are you involved in them yourself, or is it just that you're journaling and you saw them and you had a passion for them?
So I'm an old school punk rocker more than anything else. And you got to think action sports. We now think of them as sports. They're in the Olympics and whatever. It wasn't that way in the late 80s and the early 1990s. So yes, I was deeply involved in these sports, but they weren't really sports, right? These were more like punk rock subcultures at the time than actual athletic activities the way we think of them now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was.
That's cool.
I was nowhere near as good as the people who were around me, but I was definitely involved. I
punk rocker, hey? What's your punk rock music, mate? What do you enjoy listening to?
Oh, literally everything.
Everything.
Misfits, Social Distortion, Rise Against. I can go on endlessly.
Mate, when they talk about peak performance, because it's a fascinating subject, and obviously you're one of the best people to speak to about it. They look at this, this idea of not innate talent, I suppose, but something that is built from intense practice over a long period of time. So the peak golf stars and tennis players who got into it at a very early age and just kept practicing at it, and usually. Well, not usually, but they've somehow had the opportunity also to be pushed into that training facility, that education, I suppose. But it sounds like it's a little bit different from what you've come across.
Well, you're making an argument, and it's a smart one, that is essentially Anders Ericsson's big argument. And Anders, before he passed away, recently died, was a friend, and he was brilliant psychologist, and he was the one who did the work on so-called deliberate early specialization and deliberate practice.
Yeah.
And that's where Malcolm Gladwell got his 10,000 hour idea.
Yeah.
There have been...
Is that a debunk theory, the 10,000 hour idea?
No. So debunked is an open question. There have been two major challenges to Anders' work. One from me, mounted in Rise as Superman, looking at what I was seeing in the action sport athletes, and another mounted by another friend of mine, a guy named David Epstein, who wrote a book called Range, so I looked at the 10,000 hours, the so-called 10,000 hours to mastery, and I said, wait a minute, the athletes I'm studying at that time are getting there faster. They're going faster. So something else is going on with them. And David Epstein looked at the question of early specialization and wrote a great book called Range. That sort of debunked the notion of early specialization. What I will say about Anders' work is I think early specialization has been thoroughly debunked as an idea, and I think David's argument is really coherent that way. As far as the work I did, so at the center of my work, what were these athletes doing? What was at the center of that? Before I answer that question, let me first say, after I started looking at this in athletics, I actually broke a ton of bones chasing these athletes around mountains and across the ocean. Not surprisingly, I broke everything you could possibly imagine. And at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I'm so damn damaged that if I don't take this question of like, what does it take to do the impossible out of action sports and into other areas, I'm probably going to kill myself if I keep trying to chase professionals around mountains. And I did. That's essentially what I did over the next 25 years. I took this question of what does it take to achieve the impossible into business, into science, into technology, into art, etc., and essentially wrote books about what I discovered. Right? I've written 14 books at this point, and I think 9 of them are about this question, one way or another, in different fields.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually matter where I look. What domain you look at, whenever you see humans performing at their very best, you're seeing humans in a state of consciousness known to researchers as flow.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll call it being in the zone, runner's high, being unconscious. If you play basketball, if you're a stand-up comic, you'll call it the forever box. Terminology is endless. It refers to any of those moments of sort of rapt attention, total absorption. We get so focused on the task at hand that everything else just seems to disappear. And all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof.
Right. So this is a state of flow, a consciousness that is connected to that neuroscience that you talk about.
Yes. And so I work on flow. And one of the things that happens in flow is, and we could talk about why this is, there's learning and memory is significantly enhanced. One example, the Department of Defense in the States teamed up with a woman named Chris Burke, a scientist who runs a company called Advanced Brain Monitoring. They do really good EEG work, and they put soldiers into flow, and then they trained them in target acquisition skills. And they found they would learn target acquisition skills 240 to 500% faster than normal. They repeated those experiments trying to take novice. They did this with handgun shooters, archers, and marksmen, riflemen, and women, I guess. And they took novices and trained them up to the expert level, again in flow, 50% less time. So we know why this happens. And so if you can spend significantly more time in flow, there's some serious evidence that it will massively accelerate the path to mastery. And Anders and I actually have talked about it. Before he passed, we go to the same peak performance conference every year at the Santa Fe Institute, and we would have this discussion every year, sort of back and forth. And neither of us, I don't think what he discovered is wrong. I think he found a very big piece of it. I think flow is an exception, or can be used within that system. But like the way he was looking at it, he was also looking at very specific things, right? That was one of the other things about those 10,000 hours. He was looking at very, very specific kinds of skills, right?
Yeah, true.
So those were the challenges, and I'm hesitant to say no, it's wrong, because it's not wrong at all. And he was a brilliant scientist. It's just like most things in science. Science tends to be directionally accurate, not always factually accurate. And when the facts are wrong, it's usually not, okay, this is wrong. It's like, well, this is right, but that's not the whole picture, and let's build on that.
I guess it's from one perspective, isn't it? And there's two sides to this. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people on this podcast, people that I would consider experts in their fields. And many of them I've found, over 90%, they've become experts over longevity. It seems like that it's a long-term game, life, and not a short-term game. And I think that's...
In the Art of Impossible, there's this... So I don't know if you're familiar with a psychologist named Gary Klein. He's one of the world's leading experts on intuition. And he did a lot of... Later in life, more recently, he's been working with Daniel Kahneman, who's one of the other great experts in intuition. And Gary's really an expert in like real world decision making. How do experts make decisions in the real world, whether they're intuitively or logically or what? And he's got this is also in the Art of Impossible, but he's got a great list of all the stuff that experts know that non-experts don't. And that list doesn't really change, for sure. And
got a great list of stuff that experts know that non-experts don't. What do you mean there?
Like I'll give you, I can't remember the full list off the top of my head, but a couple of examples are experts notice things that don't happen, right? If there's a regular pattern and that pattern has been violated, experts tend to notice it. Non-experts sometimes, right? Is one example. A lot of things like that.
Is that because their focus is trained on that? Like if you suddenly see a nice car that you like, you suddenly see them everywhere?
No. Well,
because it's kind of like a pattern, isn't it? Like you're watching a pattern out there.
That's a really hard question neurobiologically. The reason this happens with experts is, at a very simple level, the brain is foundationally a pattern recognition machine. Everything the brain does is pattern recognition. Everything neurons do at an individual level is pattern recognition. Everything networks of neurons do when they're working together, it's again pattern recognition and prediction. Right? That's sort of the job of the brain. Yeah. And it's the associative cortex just links together much more rigorous patterns over time, because you keep getting to add more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. Let me give you a simple example that's less amorphous from my own life. Okay. Yeah. 10 years of me studying peak performance, I read probably every book on flow that was ever written. textbooks alike. I probably reread those textbooks about every 10 to 12 years or so, and have for a while. And the first time, you focus on the meat that's in the center of the paragraphs. That's where your attention is.
Yep.
Once you know that stuff, the next pass through, I don't pay attention to what's at the center of the paragraphs anymore because I know it already. It's the transition between ideas where scientists sort of like work in half-baked thoughts they're not exactly sure of, and they sort of tuck them between. You don't notice it the first time through because you just don't know enough to even be able to understand what they're talking about. You're still focused on, oh, this thing does this, does this, does this, and you don't have enough knowledge, right? 10 years in, you can go back and see all the other details. And that's a really, I think that's a common experience to anybody working in a technical field where they sort of go back through older textbooks and things like that. So that's one of the things I think you start to gain with expertise. In weird
I guess you've got to have that curiosity, which obviously you did in this field. You've gone back and reread textbooks. A lot of people won't read the same book twice, more than once.
There's also if you have a good understanding of the neural dynamics of learning, for example, you can, which is something that starts to come with expertise. You can start to shortcut processes and learn things that way.
Yeah.
And that's definitely true as well.
Fascinating. What this flow state, I mean, how long has this research been going on for? Like, if you've been obviously doing it for an incredibly long time.
Oh my God. You asked this. So in the history of psychology and neuroscience, flow and the idea of an altered state of consciousness enabling peak performance dates all the way back, basically the foundation of psychology. The first experiments were run on it in the 1870s, but Nietzsche, the philosopher who people talk about as the first peak performance philosopher, he wrote about flow. He used the term itself was, though the Greeks had a slightly different term, the modern term for flow was Rausch. It was a German word coined by Goethe, who was talking about, it translates to overflowing joy. And William James wrote a little bit about it. And so there's over 150 years worth of work that went into it. The modern era started in the 1970s with a psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's often talked about as the godfather of flow psychology. And he came on the scene in the 70s and 80s and discovered, 6 things that sort of broke flow research wide open.
Right.
I can, more than happy to break down what he learned.
Yeah. Yep.
So the first thing he learned is that let's start where he started. He wanted to know basically what makes life worth living and what is optimum performance. And he went around the world doing what is now still one of the largest studies ever done in psychology, talking to tens of thousands of people. It was a huge team that ended up working on this in the end, about the times in their life when they felt their best and they performed their best.
Yeah.
And he talked to everybody. I mean, he started with experts. He talked to stockbrokers and neurosurgeons and dancers and rock climbers and so forth. And then he moved on to the general public. Detroit assembly line workers, Chicago meat packers, elderly Korean women, Japanese teenage motorcycle gang members, Navajo chief herders, Italian grape farmers. I could go on and on. Right? Everyone. And everybody he talked to said the same thing. They said, when I'm at my best, when I feel my best and I'm performing my best, I'm in an altered state of consciousness where every decision, every action flows seamlessly, effortlessly, perfectly from the last.
Yeah.
That's where, so the first thing he did is he gave us the term flow because it emerged organically out of his study. And it's a phenomenological term, which is a fancy word for how does the experience make you feel, right? Flow actually feels flowy. It feels flowy because there's massively accelerated, high-speed, near-perfect decision-making underneath the surface that is allowing one decision to lead to the next, the next, the next. But the experience is very flowy. The next thing he discovered is that these flow states have 6 core characteristics. So when a psychologist wants to define flow, are you in flow? they look for 6 characteristics, and these are measured on a Likert scale from like not at all, not present at all, to completely present, like 1 through 7, right? That's how we do it.
Yep.
And the characteristics are everything from complete concentration on the task at hand, the merger of action and awareness, the diminishment of our sense of self, time dilation, which is a fancy way of saying time passes strangely. Sometimes it'll slow down. You'll get a freeze frame effect. Maybe anybody's been in a car crash. More frequently in flow, you just get so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours go by in like 5 minutes.
So time seems to pass pretty effortlessly.
Yeah, can pass really quickly then. And so I mentioned earlier that flow is optimal performance, both mental and physical. We don't experience, we don't know, I'm performing at an optimum. What we feel like is this incredible sense of control. Like you can control things in your environment that you can't normally control. This could be me as a writer doing things with sentences that I don't normally do, or it could be a basketball player, totally in the zone, and suddenly the basketball hoop looks as big as a hula hoop and everything is going in. And finally, the experiences are euphoric. They're autotelic. They're an end in itself. They're joyous and really meaningful. And so those 6 characteristics are how flow is determined. Flow, right? It's also how it's measured. So those are the second and the third thing he figured out is, flow is flowy. It's also definable. It's measurable. The next couple things that are really important. The first is that flow is universal. Shows up in everyone, anywhere, provided certain initial conditions are met. So humans are all hardwired for flow biologically. It's built in. And this is how we're designed to perform at our best. It's not even just humans. Most mammals can get into flow. They share the same kind of neurobiology. And a lot of mammals use flow. It's conserved across the species. So he discovered that. He also figured out that, and this is, I think, really important if you're interested in kind of working with flow and using it as a peak performance tool to know. So you can be in a state of micro flow, or you can be in a state of macro flow. It's a spectrum of experience. It's not a singular thing. Micro flow is you sit down to write a quick email at work, right? You get so sucked in, an hour goes by and you didn't notice, right? That's micro flow. It's where all 6 of those characteristics show up, but they're like dialed down to 1 or 2. Macro flow is the other end of the spectrum, and time slows down and you feel like you're one with everything, and it's a quasi mystical experience, right? And
so all 6 characteristics come into play there.
They come into play all at once, and that's where you'll get time slowing down. And the more common one is time speeds up, but time slowing down is a rarer experience. You'll get that more often in macro flow. You can also get out of body experiences can show up in macro flow.
Right. And I guess a lot of people can relate to this flow state. They've probably experienced it at some stage where they've felt that elation. Hello, Stephen. I've lost you. Just when we were getting into a bit of a flow.
No, I'm sorry about that. But I know where to pick up. So, which was the last thing Chick Sent Me High discovered, and is that flow is fundamental to happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction, meaning, and purpose. In fact, when positive psychologists now define happiness, there's 3 levels of happiness. Did I lose you again?
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I got a weird signal. There's 3 levels of happiness, and flow is actually sort of baked into the definition of the upper 2 tiers of levels of happiness achievable by humans. Mm-hmm. So, in a world where we're having, sort of mental health crises right and left.
Yeah.
It's flow's really important as a sort of anecdote for that. As a
what are the 3 levels of happiness?
So there's the level 1 is just happiness. How do you feel right here, right now? Right. And the interesting thing about this level is there's not a whole lot you can do to feel better. Dan Harris was kind of right. You can get about 10% happier, and that's about it. And we know how to do that, right? Like, every mindfulness practices, gratitude, regular de-stressing, access to nature, that sort of stuff will can move that needle, but you can't do a whole lot with it because of emotional set points.
Yeah.
The next level up is what's known as engagement or enjoyment. This is literally defined as a high flow lifestyle. So this could be anything. You could have a job that produces a lot of flow and a lot of different kinds of jobs. Any job will produce flow. It's really about how you approach the job, but you can have a high flow job, or, I live in Tahoe, and there's a lot of people who are around me who kind of work construction all summer so they can ski all winter. They have a high flow lifestyle. They're not getting flow from what they do for a living. They're getting it from the recreation. And finally, the best we can feel on the planet is purpose. And purpose is literally where you take the thing that's producing the most flow in your life and then you couple it to a cause greater than yourself. And that's that's really sort of the formula for purpose. And that's the best we get to feel on the planet. So those are the three levels that we now talk about when we talk about like levels of happiness achievable by humans.
I love that. Yeah. This, you talk about, I guess when you're in a flow state, the dilation, is it, of self, or this
diminishment of
diminishment
self.
Sense of like a fading sense of self, is it? What has that got to do with ego? Like, is that coupled with ego? Is it just because you stop?
So let's start with why that happens, and then work backwards to what we get. So a lot of different things happen in the brain in flow, but one of the bigger changes is what's known technically as transient hypofrontality. That's the temporary deactivation of the prefrontal cortex. So the part of your brain that's right behind your forehead basically turns off in flow. And it is predominantly an efficiency exchange. The brain is an energy hog. It uses a tremendous amount of our energy even at rest. So it's always trying to conserve energy. In flow, we need a ton of energy for focus. Focus is really, really intense on the task at hand. Yeah. So the brain will, because it has a fixed energy budget, it will shut down non-critical structures and repurpose that energy for attention. A lot of the structures that get shut down are in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex.
What is the purpose of the prefrontal cortex?
So it does a lot of important stuff under normal conditions. Everything from logical long-term decision making will be there. Your sense of morality, your sense of willpower, long-term decision making, complex logical problem solving, all that stuff's prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
Prefrontal cortex also creates your sense of self. Your sense of self is created by basically a bunch of different structures in the prefrontal cortex. It's a network and some other parts of the brain. But as the prefrontal cortex shuts down, this entire network collapses and we lose our sense of self. We lose our sense of ego. Most importantly, the voice in our head, that nagging, always on inner critic, gets really, really quiet.
Yeah, nice.
So that happens in flow. This of course has a huge impact on performance. When our sense of self sort of disappears.
Well, it builds up that confidence, doesn't it? Because if you don't have that sense of self, that voice that doubts, then you're more likely to just go for it.
Creativity goes through the roof, right? This is one of the reasons creativity goes so much up in flow, for exactly what you just said. You're no longer doubting all those neat ideas you have. So creativity is massively amplified. Risk-taking is also significantly amplified in flow for similar reasons. The same thing, by the way, happens to our sense of time. Time's a calculation performed by a bunch of different structures in the prefrontal cortex, and as parts of it go down, it's a network effect again, and the whole network collapses, and we lose the ability to separate past from present from future. So we're plunged into what researchers talk about as the deep now, the elongated present, the eternal moment, right? That's what happens. It's past, present, and future collapsing. And once again, huge impact on performance, because most of our anxieties, most of our fears, and fear has a huge negative impact on performance, as I'm sure you know, are rarely present tense. They're usually scary things that happened in the past that we want to avoid in the present, or they're scary things that might happen in the future. If I remove past and future from the equation, our stress hormones actually get flushed out of our system, and they get replaced by a bunch of positive, feel-good, performance-enhancing neurochemicals. So the time dilation and the vanishing of self besides just being sort of characteristics, weird things that happen in flow, they have huge impacts on performance.
The prefrontal cortex must play a purpose in our lives, right?
Oh, a huge purpose in our lives, and it's super, super critical. You have to understand that in flow is what happens when we learn a bunch of skills consciously. Prefrontal cortex is really active. We're like thinking about it. We're taking it apart. We're trying to figure it out. Yeah. We're learning it consciously. Flow is what happens once we can perform it unconsciously.
Right. Perfect. That's why you.
Right. Yeah. Where we don't have to. It's in a sense, like the way I always like to explain it is, think about swinging a bat at a baseball. There are about 11 different individual skills that are required to do that. You have to keep your eye on the ball. You have to step through the pitch. You have to follow through with your swing. You have to shift your hips. You have to, et cetera, et cetera. All those skills are usually onboarded individually. You know what I mean? Like you'll learn them in clusters, but some of them you just got to just practice one at a time. Flow is what happens when you get all 11 of those individual skills. They've all sort of been learned. Now they come together. And something you're just hitting home run after home run after home run unconsciously, automatically. That's flow.
So this flow state, is it something that we want to strive for more often? And is that possible?
So it's significantly possible. And you don't get to live in a flow state. It's not like that's not the goal. First of all, it's biologically impossible. Flow is a 4-stage cycle. And you have to move through the entire cycle before you can go back into flow. So you don't live in flow. That's not possible. But you absolutely can maximize flow. So I think your question has 2 parts, and let me just answer each of them individually. The first is, what is flow good for? And we talk about optimal performance, right? One of the things you're asking is how optimal. What the hell are you talking about? What goes up? Right. So we talked earlier about one aspect, how learning is significantly amplified. That's only one thing. We see motivation, productivity, and grit significantly amplified. In some studies on productivity, 500% above baseline. Right. Creativity and innovation, for reasons we talked about earlier as well, will spike 400 to 700%. We talked about how meaning, purpose, well-being, life satisfaction also spikes. There's a shared version of flow, right? There's individuals in flow, me in a flow state, or you in a flow state, or there's group flow, right? Which is a team performing at their best. And so you see collaborative skills go through the roof. Collaboration, cooperation, communication are also significantly amplified. Empathy goes up in flow. Ecological awareness, which is the ability to see and perceive the natural world. And then on the physical side, strength, stamina, endurance all go up. And our sensitivity to pain, decreases. So we don't feel as much pain in flow, right? So it's got a huge impact both cognitively and physically. And we understand why, why does one state of consciousness amplify all this stuff? We've sort of figured that out also. And so, but you can't perform at your best without flow. And, as that smorgasbord of things that are amplified that I just walked through, you can imagine no matter what you're doing, right? Try to think of something where you don't need more motivation, productivity. You can't, because those are basically the foundational principles of peak performance.
Yep.
And flow as peak performance amplifies all of them, basically.
Like it.
So good for everybody. And the second half of your question is, can we have more of it? Yes. This is I run an organization called the Flow Research Collective, and we're a research and training organization. On the research side, we study the neurobiology of peak human performance. So what's going on in the brain and the body when performing at our best. We do this in conjunction with scientists at USC and Stanford and Imperial College in London and so forth. And then we have a training side, and we train everybody from professional athletes and members of the U.S. Special Forces to C-suite executives at most of the Fortune 500 companies, whole companies as well, to, individuals, soccer moms in Indiana, insurance brokers in London, and coders in Delhi, global. And so over 1,000 people a month. And I mention all this because you asked, can I have more flow? Right. Yeah. We train about 1,000 people a month, and we measure flow using the standard same instrument that everybody else measures flow with. And we see on average a 70 to 80% boost in flow. So it is incredibly trainable. And the reason is this: we have a, all we've done is we work backwards from the neurobiology. It turns out flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 22 that have been discovered. There's probably way more, but we have a firm grasp on 22 of them.
Wow.
So actually, I just saw an article yesterday, maybe 23. There's a news study out.
So what flow states have triggers, you say, that lead to more flow states?
Yeah. So like, think about it this way. Flow follows focus. It only shows up when all our attention is in the right here, right now on the task at hand. Right. That's what all these triggers do. They drive attention into the present moment. They do it a bunch of different ways. Some of them will push a neurochemical called dopamine into our system. Some will push a neurochemical called norepinephrine into our system. Both of those chemicals are significant.
Norepinephrine, what's that? I'd hear a lot about dopamine, but...
So you know what adrenaline is, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay. In the brain, we don't have adrenaline. We have noradrenaline or norepinephrine, same thing. So epinephrine or adrenaline in the body, same word. In the brain, it's noradrenaline and a norepinephrine. That's just the brain version of adrenaline. That's norepinephrine.
Right. Say that word 3 times fast.
I'll give you an example. How do you know you've got norepinephrine in your system? It feels twitchy, first of all. Excitement is norepinephrine. Curiosity is norepinephrine. Anxiety is norepinephrine based. All of those sensations have and you know what's really norepinephrine based is vigilance. So, and this could be good or bad, right? Romantic love, when you fall in love, norepinephrine is one of the big chemicals that cocktail for that. And when you can't stop thinking about the person you're falling in love with, that's norepinephrine.
The crush.
Same when you're scared.
Obsession.
Right? A crush, an obsession, also a fear. Right? If you've got like a pathological terror or a phobia, you can't stop thinking about the thing that scares you. Right?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about it being anxious.
I'll give you an example. So here's a weird one, but remember at the start of COVID, when we didn't know what was causing it exactly, and was it contagious, and could you touch surfaces, and suddenly every person you looked at and every surface was a threat. Yeah. There was like that 1 month period. That's all norepinephrine.
Well, that explains a lot, because when you feel that anxiety or that fear, and often it's linked to, hey, maybe this is something that I should move towards, or maybe this is something that actually is beneficial to me.
That's exactly right. Norepinephrine and dopamine are the chemicals that govern approach and avoid, which are the two basic behaviors, right? There's, by the way,
which is all about human survival, isn't it?
Yeah. Choline and glutamate, and there's a bunch of other things, but like how we experience norepinephrine and dopamine. They often talk about these chemicals as the molecules of emotion. So, dopamine is also excitement and joy and, curiosity, desire to make meaning out of your world. When your cell phone buzzes in your pocket, you've got a message and you're like, oh my God, I want to check that. I'm curious. That's dopamine. That's doing that. When you get drunk and you start to feel really happy, that's dopamine. And again, that it drives attention. And now the other thing the triggers will do is they'll lower cognitive load. Cognitive load is all the crap you're trying to pay attention to at any one time. And if I lower cognitive load, I liberate a bunch of energy. Right. Yes, and the brain will automatically repurpose it to pay attention to whatever you're doing. So that's what the triggers do. That's how they work. And, some of that, they're really, they're things like novelty is a flow trigger, complexity, unpredictability, risk. These all produce dopamine and norepinephrine. Pattern recognition, when we link ideas together. That's why there's reading is a very common producer of flow. And one of the reasons is you're reading a book and, this idea linked with that idea, linked with that idea, linked with that idea. And every time that happens, you get a little bit of dopamine. And we all know this experience. Like you've done a crossword puzzle. You get an answer right. You feel that little rush of pleasure. That's dopamine. Yeah. So it's right. It's the same thing. It shows, right. And so that will drive us into flow. There's a whole bunch of, other things that do, other stuff. But those are just examples. So how those triggers work, how to utilize them for our benefit, that's how you amplify flow. And that's, by the way,
this state of flow is very exciting. It's you've talked me into it, Stephen. I know you've got some radical ideas in your books, but can you share with us a few simple things that maybe we could all take away to try and move towards more states of flow?
So yes, and so I'll talk through some of these triggers in a little more detail, but a caveat has to come on the front end of this.
Yeah.
Which is this. I always tell people this. I'm not interested in technologies. I'm not interested in substances. I don't do whiz-bang stuff. I like stuff that is reliable and repeatable, works everywhere, works for everyone in any situation. And if that's what you're looking for physiology and psychology.
Yeah.
Right? The bad news is everything I'm about to talk about, none of it's sexy. If you go talk about it at a bar on Friday night, I can guarantee you're not going to get laid. It's not sexy. It's not that, and the reason I mention all this,
I like not sexy. It's good.
It's a problem for people, right? It's like they want the whiz bang, and when they don't get the whiz bang, they don't think it's going to work, so they don't play with it. So,
well, that's life, isn't it? I mean, everyone wants the sexy, and no one wants the not sexy, but it's the not sexy that makes life.
Exactly. So I'll give you. Let's just talk about the triggers we were talking about. Well, let's actually start. The biggest one we should talk about is what's often called the golden rule of flow, the most important of flow's triggers. It's what's known as the challenge skills balance. So the idea, remember, flow follows focus, and all the triggers drive our attention into the now. We pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of that task slightly exceeds our skill set. So when you have to stretch, push on your skills sort of to the utmost,
comfort zone,
you're outside your comfort zone, right? You're a little outside your comfort zone. That's when focus is absolutely maximized. That's the sweet spot for flow. So this is sort of near, but not on the midpoint between boredom and anxiety. Boredom is, this is boring. I'm not paying any attention here. Anxiety is, whoa, way too much stimulation. I'm paying too much attention. In between is what's known as the flow channel. So what is tricky about this is a bunch of years ago, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, teamed up with a Google mathematician that tried to put a number on what is the percentage difference between challenge and skills. And they did a back of the envelope calculation, came up with a 4% difference, meaning we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task is 4% greater than the skills we bring to it. Now, that was they didn't think that was a real number. They thought that was a metaphor. We took that number and studied it on and off for about 5 years. And what I can tell you is it's really hard to prove. It's really hard to study. It's really hard to test.
Imagine.
We think it's a damn accurate metaphor. Right. Is all I can tell you. But the reason I wanted to tell you that is 4% is kind of interesting because if you're shy, meek, timid, not really a hard charger, that kind of wiring, 4% is tricky because, as you mentioned, it's outside your comfort zone. So you have to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable to do this work.
Yeah, I like that.
The other side of the coin.
Only 4%. I mean, it doesn't sound too much.
Well, that's the problem for most people. So the bigger problem is on the other side of this. Most people are hard chargers these days and really go hard, and 4% is too small. And hard chargers will bite off challenges that are 10%, 20%, 30% greater than their skills simply because it excites them, because it's interesting and it's cool, right? And what the science shows is, first of all, you want those are called high hard goals or high hard challenges.
Yep.
They're phenomenal for motivation. Simply setting a proper high hard goal can give you an 11 to 25% boost in motivation. So fantastic tool for increasing motivation. What flow studies show is great. Set those big goals, but make sure that what you're doing right here, right now, it's just 4% greater. So take the big goal and chunk it down. Right. So the task that's actually in front of you is only 4% greater, 5% greater, that sort of thing.
That makes sense. I imagine those big audacious leaps are probably not as longer lasting. You know, they can lead to burnout and failure and give up and all that sort of thing.
The biggest problem, so we talked a lot about norepinephrine earlier. The biggest problem is you want a little bit of norepinephrine in the brain to produce flow. Too much, and you're producing anxiety. Right. So the reason those big goals are so tricky. There's a bunch of different reasons. But one of them is they just produce too much anxiety. They knock you out of that challenge skills sweet spot.
Yeah.
Lee, you dropped
Yeah,
out?
I'm here. Yep, gotcha.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was waiting for you to ask another question.
I realise we've got time constraints too, mate, so...
Yeah, I've got about 9 minutes for you.
Cool. So norepinephrine, we were talking there.
Oh, I said, yeah, you just, a little bit is great. Too much, and you're out of the sweet spot.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
To maximize flow, you want to stay in the center.
Gotcha. We've got a terrible line here, Stephen. It's starting to break up fairly bad. But you got me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Mate, I know there's a lot to break down with this topic, and I guess maybe it encourages a round 2 sometime, but certainly I want to, just let people know that you've got the website there, Flow Research Collective, that you can go to. So flowsearchcollective.com is the website where people can learn more about it and, read more about your research there.
I can also take it one step farther for folks. If you go to www.flowblocker.com, flowblocker.com,
Okay.
there are about 6 major flow blockers, things that will knock you out of flow or keep you out in the anyways. And we built a diagnostic, and so anybody can take it, and you just throw your email in there, take the diagnostic, and we'll email you back results and a really detailed action plan on how to tackle that. So that's for anybody. And the last thing that it's one last thing that's worth mentioning. Flow is part of peak performance. There's obviously a whole lot more going on. Flow is it's 1/4 of the picture in a sense. But my most recent book, there's a lot of different books. We started with the fact that Rise of Superman, I think, is my favorite. But The Art of Impossible, the new book, is the first time I've done. It's a how-to primer based on all the neuroscience, all the work we've done at the Flow Research Collective over the years, and it looks at flow, all the flow hacking stuff, and all the other components of peak human performance. And it's literally a A to Z playbook on peak human performance that anybody can use.
Can you get box sets of your books, Stephen?
Not yet. Which isn't. It's because I've switched. I have 3 different publishers. I write fiction. I have one when I write fiction, I'm with one person. When I write on technology, I'm with a different house. And when I write about peak human performance, I'm with a different house.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing's unified.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about it, trying to figure out how to do it because a lot of people have asked.
Yeah, gotcha. The one of my favourites of yours was Stealing Fire with Jamie. You wrote, just fascinating work. But look, there's a lot there, a lot to be explored. So guys, check it out, flowsearchcollective.com. And the other one, Stephen, was flowblocker.com. Is that right?
Yep. And if you want more about me, it's stephenkotler.com.
And Stephen, I'll stick the links in the show notes. This is episode 1000. Stephen, I really appreciate your time, and you've made the 1,000 mark for me too. So that's just awesome.
Well, congratulations on 1,000. That's good work. That is good work. Nicely done.
The passion drives me, and I get to interview rad people like yourself.
It's a good job.
It is a good job. Stephen, apologies for the poor connection we've had too, and for the audience listening. Look, it's a little bit crackly, but we've had some gold today, so enjoy it at thehiddenwhy.com. And until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon. Thanks, guys, for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you love what you're hearing. If you like this episode, guys, or any of the episodes that you're listening to here at The Hidden Why, please do me a favor by sharing it. You can share it with your families, you can share it with your loved ones. You can do that by using your favorite social media channels, using the icons on the platform that you're listening to The Hidden Why podcast. Also, guys, if you're a fan of the show, please connect with me. Connect with me at thehiddenwhy.com. I love to hear from you. I love to converse with the people that listen to this show to find out what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and perhaps if they have any questions or feedback for the show as well.
You can stay up to date with all that I'm releasing here, guys. I do a solo show every Monday, a 3-minute thought every Thursday. I do 2 interviews a week on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and a book review every Friday. You can stay up to date with all that by subscribing to my newsletter at thehiddenwhy.com. Just enter your email address there, and also subscribing to the podcast on the platform that you choose to listen to your podcast. You can also support the show, guys, by using the Amazon links at thehiddenwhy.com. So if you like books, you can get all the books that I review there, and anything else really that you like to purchase through Amazon. So use that link, it helps support the show. And we've also got a deal with Audible, guys. Audible is a fantastic way to listen to all your favorite books. We've got a deal with them so you can get 2 free books when you subscribe subscribe to a 30-day free trial. So check that out again at thehiddenwhy.com. Guys, that's it from me. You know what to do. Go out there, breathe more passion into every single moment. Do everything with greater purpose, and in doing so you will discover your hidden why. This is The Hidden Why. My name is Lee Martinuzzi. Until next time, peace, passion and purpose. See you soon.